What's
Well,
up, everybody?
hello, everybody.
We are back. We are back finally after a long absence. You thought we were done with Friday the 13th because we finished up with the last officially released studio film in the saga, the 2009 remake, but you were wrong. You were wrong.
You are wrong because we told you from the beginning that we weren't done with Friday the 13th yet. That just means you weren't actually listening to the podcast, and that feels rude.
How dare you? How very, very dare you? No, we decided a long time. PJ suggested it, and I was all on board with it. PJ has always long been a big fan of the Never Hike Alone series. Well, it's two films at this point, but they were shorts, so they got textualized into one anthology film, which is the one we're covering today. Then this, but anyway, he really liked it. He was a really big fan of it. He pitched it to finish out the franchise, and I said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's give these the flowers they deserve. Give them some props. Womp Stomp Studios, what a great crew of fans that made a film that could have easily slid into the franchise, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really why I initially, when we talked about doing Friday the 13th, I knew that we were going to get down here, and initially we were actually going to try to do this series last year, to try to tie into Never Hike Alone 2 coming out. And it just didn't line up in what we had planned and what we were doing in the right way. But I knew when we were doing this, I wanted to go to these movies because the truth of the matter is that as far as Friday the 13th is concerned, we are in a wilderness era of the franchise, as it were, similar to my feelings and thoughts on the Doctor Who wilderness era. Once the Sylvester McCoy series ended and the Paul McGann movie happened, there was a lot between both sides of those times before Eccleston arrived that a lot of people were doing a lot of different things. Didn't matter if it was novels, it didn't matter if it was comics or audio dramas or what have you. People were trying to do something with the franchise. Friday the 13th has been dormant since 2009. Some of that comes from rights issues involving the characters. Some of that comes from general incompetence, honestly, if I'm going to call it what it is, because there is this feeling after 2009 that they just couldn't seem to figure out what to do with it before the rights issues really hit the fan. They had every chance to do a sequel to 2009 before they didn't. Right. And I don't know if that was locking themselves into an ending and realizing that it was hard to come back from it. That was something we talked about in our last episode. I think that they almost perm killed Michael in the wrong way, in a way that I don't think some of the other movies necessarily had in the past. Just a lot of convergence in the universe that has stopped Jason from being back on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, we do feel like we're going towards that. We obviously have Crystal Lake coming out at this point. There's been a movement in the right direction, but you're right. 2009 is a lot. That's a long time ago at this point. It feels like it isn't, but it is.
15 years.
My God, 2009. My God.
I mean, that's 15 years ago. Like, it's been that long since Jason's been on the big screen. Like, there's no real sugarcoating that, right?
Yeah.
So in that, there's a lot of fan films that are out there for many franchises, for many things. But a couple of years ago, one of our mutual friends had pushed this trailer basically my way for a movie called Never Hike Alone. I didn't pay attention to a lot of what was going on initially around the project. I hadn't really heard of it. We've seen many fan films for many things, and a lot of the time they are fun to watch, but they are very clearly fan films.
Right.
And that's not to be derogatory towards the work that people put in. I don't want that to come across that way.
No.
But fan films have a very specific aura and feel at times. I think that comes down to you're doing as best you can with what little limited resources you have, and that's going to give it a very specific feel, and that's not a bad thing. Like, as long as the writing is there and you do your best, I think that there's a lot of really great fan films that exist out in the world. They just do. Yeah. But then I saw Never Hike Alone, and this is a project that was born out of Womp Stomp Films. That is the studio that has put these together, and Vincent DeSanti, who helped write and directed these. Goodness gracious, these are the kind of things that make you realize that it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can really turn in an effort that is of the caliber of a lot of the bigger budgeted horror films that we see,
Right.
and some of the things that the studios have done with this character in the past.
Right.
And so in this wilderness era, there have been few productions that have stood out to me in the way that the Never Hike Alone films have. And I think a big part of that comes from this is a series of films now. Again, it's really technically 2 films with Never Hike Alone, The Ghost Cut, which we're going to talk about today, and Never Hike Alone 2. But if you watched it originally, it was like a 40-minute film called Never Hike Alone, then Never Hike Alone in the Snow, which was a 25-minute prequel film. They've mashed those together in The Ghost Cut to create a more fool-driven narrative.
Right.
And in that, they really set out to tell a tale that also is a continuation of Friday the 13th Part 6 and the Tommy Jarvis of it all. Tom
Right.
Matthews is back as Tommy Jarvis in these films, which is what I think helps make these stand out. Because now suddenly we're in this world where Tommy Jarvis, played by Tom Matthews, is back fighting Jason one last time. There's something really special about that, and the people involved know that.
There's
And
legitimacy to it. It makes a
yes,
legitimacy to it. Absolutely.
and he's not the only one, obviously, who comes back. You have Sheriff Cologne is back. Rick Cologne, played once again by Vincent Gastafaro. Yeah, bang.
Yeah, like
it's just the best.
I love it. He's great in this one too.
Yeah. So, when we started talking about this, I knew I wanted to highlight this because in a world right now of legacy sequels, in a world where a lot of our favorite heroes come back for one last go around or whatever it is, in a world where we're very Jasonless, Womp Stomp Studios stood up, crowdfunded these movies, and said, "We hear you. We want to tell our stories, and we want to give Jason and Tommy Jarvis another shot." And that is where Never Hike Alone is born out of.
Right.
To me, that is special. To me, this is being done by people who just absolutely love this franchise, and I couldn't think of a better place to prop that up. Because to me, part of what we do here is push movies to people who have not necessarily seen them. Yeah, we cover movies sometimes that we don't necessarily love also. Like, you've seen us in the podcast. It can be very hard to sit and talk about something that you don't necessarily like, but it also opens the door for people to learn what works, what doesn't. If you like it, great, but you also hear these differing opinions. But I love that we have this kind of privilege and seat in a place where people come to us to listen to us talk about movies. And I have people who ask me for recommendations all the time on things. And this is our chance to recommend something that you're not necessarily even going to know exists. That's a big thing. And here's the coolest thing. These Never Hike Alone movies, you don't have to pay to watch them. These are on the Womp Stomp Films YouTube channel right now. You can go over there and watch them for free.
Yeah.
All you have to do is hit play. You can also go to their Indiegogo right now. I think it ends at the end of the week for the second one before it hits Blu-ray. Right. You can back it to get a Blu-ray copy of Never Hike Alone and Never Hike Alone 2 right now, if you wanted to. I'm not paid to do this. I'm just telling you, you can if you want. If you really enjoy these and want to put your money where your mouth is, go find the Indiegogo for the Never Hike Alone 2 campaign and help back this. But it is our responsibility as film podcasters, fans, pundits, whatever you want to call us, to bring you guys cool things.
Yeah.
And in that is why I had to bring Never Hike Alone to the table if we were going to talk about Friday the 13th. Because to me, the Never Hike Alone films genuinely exist to be the continuations of the Friday the 13th franchise that we have all been waiting for a very long time.
Absolutely. And I want to say real quick on two things. PJ brought this to me. I was unaware of it as well. PJ brought this to me after she fell in love with it. We got to watch it together. We had to watch the sequel together when we were
Yes.
one of the a few times we get to be together in real life, like in the same room. We watched it in the same room and loved it again. We're going to be fair to this. We're going to. I think the best thing I can do is to treat this fairly. So even though I love this, I love a lot about it. I'm very positive about it. I'm not going to be 100% positive. So I don't think I don't think the creators want me to be. I think creators want me to be honest in my feedback and honest in their reactions to it. And that's not any kind of warning, because overall I did like it quite a bit, and I enjoy it quite a bit. And I can think of no higher honor than to look at this like I would look at any Friday the 13th film. I'm not going to give it any kind of like, oh, this is a fan film, so I'm going to like let it slide. I'm going to look at it like a real film, because it deserves that. And that's almost one of the highest praises you can give a fan film, and it deserves to be looked at just like an entry in the franchise. Criticism, warts and all. But this does a really great job. I do want to ask you a question about the history. As I watch it again, I know that so Never Hike Alone was there. Then it was Never Hike in the Snow, which was like the prequel. Was Disappear, which is the opening section, was that created for the Ghost Cut? Was that also one that was on its own? I don't know.
No, that was on its own as its own thing. I think more of a. I don't know for sure exactly where this exists in it. I just know it was not like it's kind of also like a proof of concept. It feels like to me.
Okay.
Of what they were going to do. I know it was a music video that was on their page, basically.
Okay. All right. I got it. I got you.
So
okay.
I think that in using it here, because again, this feels almost more like an anthology as we talk about the Ghost Cut. So Never Hike Alone, the Ghost Cut takes a music video called Disappear, Never Hike Alone in the Snow, and Never Hike Alone, and puts them together as one singular experience.
Now, to interject real quick, did they add? Because I thought, if I remember correctly, they added other stuff to this Ghost Cut as well.
They did. They added a couple of like scenes, basically, that help propel things forward.
Okay.
To make it feel more fluid as one narrative. Right. It's mostly like the stuff involving the cops and things like that. Of the what would you call it? Like the news report stuff.
Gotcha.
Okay. Some of that was kind of put in to help smooth it out and try to create a more singular narrative, but also still knowing that this is three kind of separate pieces being put together as one.
Right. Okay.
And so it's interesting because this cut of these three projects being put together is the way I watch it all the time. But it's so funny because it feels very different watching it this way than when it was initially released as Never Hike Alone, then Never Hike Alone in the Snow. Because Never Hike Alone in the Snow sets up the body that is found later in the movie. Like, there's all these little things that Never Hike Alone in the Snow does, but it also gives you Tommy Jarvis so much earlier in the story. Versus when you would have watched it originally with Never Hike Alone, where you could have watched it not even knowing it was a Jason movie necessarily, right? Until it happened upon the Crystal Lake of it all, and then the Tommy Jarvis appearing at the end. So it does change how you look at it. But together as a combined story, I think this, for me, is the way that I would always kind of hoped and would want a franchise like this to continue. And it's done in such a way that's so different because this is really propulsed by a narrative in a way that a lot of the Friday films aren't. It's not going through a lot of the same beats as a Friday the 13th film. There is like singular character work being done. There is a single victim that is being hunted versus, there being a group of people. And it really changes the dynamic in such an interesting way that it actually feels like an evolution of the franchise in a way that we've never seen quite this way. I kind of love that singular focus. I kind of like that singular narrative because it also makes us care about our final guy, but it also makes Jason really scary in a different sort of way. Because having this version of the character that is so unrelenting after a single person and so just ever present in that way is kind of fascinating. Now, there's other people obviously who die in this, but when you get to the Never Hike Alone part in particular, it is so singular in that goal of watching Jason going after Kyle, and Kyle being this hiker who just happens upon all of this, and he pisses him off by ending up in his place. It just
Right.
really works. And to me, it feels like a breath of fresh air in a franchise that by the time you get to 8 does feel a little run down
Yeah.
in the, you know what I mean? In that, like we talked about it, it feels very been there, done that at times. It's not
Right.
a bad thing, but it's true. And so this feels like a new take on it that is fresh, it feels revitalized, it feels singular, and it also allowed them to do something that Friday had kind of flirted with a little bit of a found footage of it too. Um, Using the hiking stuff to really change up the way the action feels, to make it feel personal, to make it feel claustrophobic. It's just a totally new take on the franchise that feels familiar.
Absolutely. And I'd like to say mostly about, which we'll get into more next episode. It really seems like they kind of found their footing. They found their footing and further developed. They developed techniques. They developed what they wanted to say, what they wanted to do. And then, I mean, I'm going to say it out right here. Spoiler alert. I prefer Never Hike Alone, Never Hike Alone 2. Because it feels like a more cohesive, finished story. Like this feels like a little bit of a touch and go, a little bit like we're going to try this, let me put it all together. So it's automatically an anthology film. Despite some of their best efforts to make it cohesive, it is still definitely an anthology type film. Whereas Never Hike Alone 2 felt more like a here is our story, this is what we're trying to do. So this is a great first step in the right direction for it, I will say. Absolutely.
It totally is. And it's funny
Yeah.
that you say that because when you watch it as the ghost cut, you can even see it in Never Hike Alone in the Snows portion, how much farther they'd already come off of Never Hike
Right.
Alone. You know what I'm saying? And it actually makes the second half of the movie in Never Hike Alone oddly stronger in some capacity because you get so much of the buildup, but you can definitely see in it also this is the finding the footing part of it, and yet it still works.
Absolutely does. And it's funny because, like you mentioned before, if Disappear was the like proof of concept, whatever, and then Never Hike Alone came, then Never Hike in the Snow, I progressively liked each one better. Like the
Yes.
Disappear part was my least favorite, which we'll get into why in a minute. I think, but then Never Hike Alone, I love the concept for. Had some issues with some of the things. Never Hike in the Snow was easily my favorite part, and easily the one that really kind of felt like it gelled everything together. And that's not even because, like, I think people might go, well, yeah, that's the one that's got Tom Matthews in it. That's the one that's got, the sheriff. It's not because of that. That didn't hurt. It didn't hurt to have
No.
the legitimacy of it. But I think overall it just felt more apt. Let me ask you another question at the end. So at the end, this is obviously we're going full spoilers here, guys. Obviously, as far as the construction goes, I'm fascinated about the construction of it. At the end of Never Hike Alone, we did have Tom Matthews as the ambulance driver and everything else.
Yeah.
Was that always a part of that part, or
Yes.
was that an added addition to?
That was always there.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I remember watching it for the first time and being shocked as hell.
Right. Okay.
That even popped in, and I lost my mind because it was like, oh my god, that's really Tom Matthews. Like they really got Tom Matthews in this. Because again, I really went in blind. I hadn't seen anything about it outside of my friend handing me the link and going, "Here, please watch this."
Please watch this. Right.
I want to say that was Dan Brunner and Tim Franco who really pushed it on me because I had never seen it.
That sounds very much like a Tim Franco thing for sure.
Yeah, it 100% does. So, I mean, if it wasn't for them, I never would have. I mean, I probably would have stumbled on it eventually, but it was definitely handed to me as you need to watch these.
Right.
Do that. And so I did. And I got to say, man, it's so funny because I think what you're saying is very true about Never Hike Alone in the Snow. And again, I think it only makes Never Hike Alone better in hindsight because a lot of the story stuff in Snow is so strong and so put together in a way like Never Hike Alone is very straightforward, right?
Right.
Hiker goes into the woods, stumbles on Crystal Lake, Jason gets mad, Jason chases, the game is gone, right? Like that's what it is. But Snow starts to actually get into the lore of it all in a way that is a little different. You start to see little things and putting a story together that calls for this to be done in a way
100%.
that's so interesting, because now you're actually opening this world up to all these things that have already happened, all these people who are hiding what has happened, all the
Right.
you really get this feel that with Never Hike Alone in the Snow, they really start to pull on those threads to set up where Never Hike Alone 2 is eventually going to go, but it also just in general where you're going to find Kyle once you get to Never Hike Alone.
Absolutely, and that's also what I mean about how I like the second one so much. The second one was just so well focused and well, like they learned what they wanted to do. Like I still feel like Never Hike Alone was great. And but there was a little bit of meandering. There's a bit like they had a great concept, and because of the concept, they had to force some things that didn't feel necessarily right to a Friday the 13th film for me necessarily. But it felt like they did what they wanted to do. They had their story to tell, and it didn't like kill it for me. I still really highly enjoyed it, but because they used their experience on that, they had obviously a great experience about it. They were so successful with the idea behind it and how they executed their ideas overall. That by the time they got to Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, it was like okay. It was almost like the first one was like a warm up pitch, and then Never Hike Alone was like, okay, this is where we're going. This is where we're going with this, and you're gonna come along with us. And I was like all on board at that point, absolutely. Although I will say, watching. And unfortunately, with the prequel being my favorite, watching it in a way, I almost wish I could watch it. Like I should have watched it the way it was like released in a way. I never watched it. I watched it in the Ghost Cut order, which means I watched the last one in the middle before going back to Never Hike Alone. I almost wish I had been along the whole time through and watched them like develop.
Right.
Because it would have been a great. I mean, I can see it still. Like I obviously am intelligent enough to be able to go. Okay, I see what they did here. I see how they came about more there. But yeah. Overall, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree. I think this is why the second part rules for me, and everything else is great. Let's talk about the first part, though. I will say, looking at that as a proof of concept does help it out for me, because this is definitely my least favorite of the bunch, and part of it is because of how it was not how it was shot. It was more like the tone on the film itself felt too warm, maybe. I don't know if that's the right feel. Maybe it felt too modern in a way.
It feels the best way to describe it to me, because warm is the right way, but it feels very summer at the beach. Feels very much like this kind of open world that feels vibrant and bright in a way that we really hadn't seen Jason in a vibrant and bright type of setting. Like we've seen Jason during the day, I guess, but a lot of the movies take place more at night or without that vibrant, sunny feel. It feels a little weird.
It does. It does feel a little weird. I think it might have been part of the like. I think it had the Coors Light in it, and it just the way they had it, like it was almost like a product placement. It felt like in a way. And again, this is where the fan film thing does come in. Some of the acting of the teens was, it just felt very generic, but it wasn't like a movie. It was almost like we're gonna do the greatest hits of Jason in 5 minutes. Like this is like
it feels like, hey, we're reestablishing who the character is for people who may not know,
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Also, the 5 minutes of it, like that, is where the detriment, or I don't know how long it was. It's definitely the shortest of the bunch, and but it doesn't lead to any kind of be able to sit with anything for a bit. It's all kind of like, here it is. Here's what you see. Here's Jason. Here they're going to kill him, and it all spits over. But there also was some really cool moments that I could see if I was a studio head. I'm like, I like what they did there. I loved the intro of Jason. I kind of loved also the idea of Jason basically just sitting in his home, not moving, like waiting to be triggered. Like almost like some kind of like also like it's like the alarm bells go off. Someone's in my domain. I'm going to get them now. And that I love. That I love. There's some weird stuff they did also. I don't even know what it was. It was like almost like a fantasy kind of thing. Like some trails of Jason's face at times. The light. I don't know. It was effect added afterwards, which were kind of cool for what they're trying to do. So I liked that overall. I know what else bothered me a little bit, though. It felt like the soundtrack was off for some reason. I don't know why. It felt like it felt like maybe they're modernizing it or whatever, but it felt too. I also felt like it should have been. It almost should feel dated. Friday the 13th should almost feel dated.
Yeah. Well, and that's always the hard part, right? Because we talked about it with the 2009 film where they even were told basically like you have to keep it modern. Like
Right.
we can't put it in the past. Basically, no one wants that. We have to modernize it in some capacity. And they did their best with that in some way. And I kind of get that vibe here of we have to make sure that we do it, but we have to modernize it in some capacity too. But I do like it again as a music video and proof of concept for even using the character is good. Because it shows that they know the character at least.
Absolutely.
And it also has to prove that if we know the character, we can do something with the character, right? And I
Right.
think that to me, ultimately, that's the most important thing. It doesn't change the fact that, yeah, I could definitely see the song being not for you. And not,
Yeah.
I just mean in general as a person, like can feel very weird up front. It feels very odd to start a movie that way. But again, it's more of like an anthology thing. And so because of that, it just gives you Jason right away.
Right.
Here's
Absolutely.
Jason. This is a Jason movie. We're going to have Jason killing people. And this is, if you don't know who Jason is, this is Jason.
This is
And
Jason is.
I think that totally works. Also being known that these guys are hoping that most of us already know.
Right.
But if you don't, here's your introduction.
Absolutely. And it does do that very well. Absolutely does
Yeah.
do that very well. So I can leave that part behind. If I completely understand why they included it. I don't think they needed to include it. It almost felt like that should have been like one of those. It almost feels like an old throwback where you could have a trailer that had nothing, no actual footage from the rest of the movie. In a way, kind of
Right.
like this is Jason in a way. So I kind of look at it that way. But if I ever
Yeah.
really want to watch
100%.
or ever really want to watch this again, I could probably just start right from Never Hiking the Snow and move through them, and not feel like I missed a whole lot. If that makes sense.
For sure.
But
I gotta say, man, so in that, I think that it really is clear Vincenti DeSanti really cares about this world in this
100%.
character, because
100%.
as soon as this ends and you start getting into Never Hike in the Snow, this is the thing that fans have been wanting for a long time. Crystal Lake in the winter, Jason hunting in the snow. This just unbearable feel of dread in the middle of winter. Because one thing people don't really think about and realize, and this is, I think, why when you look at a Shane Black movie, Shane Black loves setting things at Christmas time, because when it comes to Christmas and like the Christmas setting and that feel of snow and winter, it brings dread.
Yeah.
It's like, for as warm and cozy as it should feel as a winter thing, because Christmas is supposed to be about family and loved
Right.
ones and chestnuts on an open fire
Right.
and Christmas lights and trees. But for a lot of people, it's dread. It's cold. It's isolating. I love that this opens in a cold, dreadful, isolating feel with these overhead shots of Crystal Lake in the winter, and just you already know, and you see this one kid just running, 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 running. Corlin Gordon playing Mark Hill. He's this kid who goes out to go hiking and runs across Jason, and it's this unrelenting cat and mouse game in the middle of the snow.
What I love about that is that outside of like, part 9, Jason Goes to Hell, kinda, we don't usually open up in the middle of a Jason rampage, so to speak. You never open up.
No.
It's about we go into we introduce ourselves to the kids, we introduce ourselves to the setting, we talk about things, and all of a sudden Jason gets triggered and slowly starts taking out. No, we open up right in the middle of the action. The kid's running from Jason right away. I love that choice, and I will say retroactively, maybe that's why putting Disappear on before that actually kind of works to a degree in some ways.
Yes.
So it does introduce the character first and everything else. But I liked how immediate it felt. Immediately, I'm like brought to the edge of my seat going, oh, okay, we are here already. We are, because you're not easing into this. This is, balls deep. We're in LA. It's like,
what it feels like a little bit? It kind of feels like, weirdly enough, at least to me, Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Because you're immediately dropped into a situation that has already started. We don't necessarily know how, we don't necessarily know why, but we are knee deep in whatever this situation already is, and we're just gonna ride it, and I love that.
You know what I like about it too, specifically, is that in a series of movies where we introduce the kids or the teenagers first or whatever, we always talk about, well, we love to root for Jason, and a lot of times these teenagers do stupid things, and like it lets you like go, okay, they should be killed anyway. They're doing dumb stuff. They're being assholes. With this character, we haven't met this character yet, so we automatically actually feel engaged to keep him alive anyway. Like we don't watch because we don't know that if you're an asshole or not. We think you could be a great character as far as we know.
Yep.
We don't know yet, so automatically I think we're engaged in that kind of like, oh, I want to know who is this kid? What did he do to piss off this big guy at a hockey match? What's going on here?
It's awesome.
It is. It's very awesome. And even though we have the kill pretty quickly, I'll say right now, the kill with him after Hawkeye Jason, the blood of the snow, we get the axe in the mouth kill, which is easily my favorite kill of this entire thing. But not only that, I think it ranks in the franchise kills. It is so well done. I don't want to even say, like I said before this whole thing began, I didn't want to compare it's a fan film. It was even more impressive because it's a fan film, like how the effects were brilliantly well done. I did not see any
real.
It looked genuine. The blood pouring out, the Joker's smile given, the axe sitting there. It was grotesque, gory. Chef's kiss, guys, to your special effects team for that.
It's again, it ranks in the kills of the series for a reason. It really is up there as one of the all-time Jason moments. And honestly, again, Hawkeye Jason is also one of those moments. The Jason with the arrow is one of the most interesting and kind of scary moments in the movie because it's funny. 2009 has its own version of Jason with an arrow.
Right.
This one is arguably scarier to me because this kid knows that Jason is hunting him. And there's all this buildup too with him trying to get to his car and hitting the button to try to like get to the car that is so tension building.
Genuinely tense.
Yeah. It's so tense. And to your point, we don't know this kid. And it makes it more tragic when we learn more about him. And he really seems like he's actually just a decent kid who just moved out here with his mom. Like who's been struggling to find friends, who really hasn't gotten out. He seems like a genuine dude who just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think that really humanizes it in a way that we don't always get in these movies. Right. And I don't mean that as a dig either, because I love these movies. Friday the 13th matters to me for a reason. Like I love Friday, but I love having a character that I actually just genuinely feel bad about.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know? Absolutely. And I think part of it comes down to the case where obviously this is not a large cast. There's not a lot. No. This is not Jason picking off like 7, 8, 9 teenagers trying to get that's like that magical kill count like 13 or something like that. But because of that, you make the deaths count and you make the characters count, and that's what this does the entire time. And right away from the get-go, we were in the snow. First of all, like you said, something that we've all long thought would be amazing to see. It's either in my estimation, it's always been either Jason killing somebody in the snow with a lot of blood or lightsaber fight in the snow. Either way, those are the two things like that aesthetic they want, and this gives us one of those for sure. And then it follows up. I gotta say, I was like, you mentioned the car. I tried to open the car alarm going off. And then Jason killing the car alarm was actually one of the funniest things I've seen.
Like, because he's like so irritated by it.
Like, what the fuck is it? Shut the fuck up! Does what everybody wants to do.
You're gonna ruin my mom's sleep.
He does everything. Jason become the audience every time you hear one of those car alarms going off. Like, God, just shut up.
And I gotta say, man, you know what? It's a great joke. Huh? You're right. It makes me laugh every single time. But also, we were just talking about modern, like making these movies more modern for a modern audience. What a perfect way to encapsulate the modern world with the car.
Right.
But without it feeling out of place.
Right. Exactly. Same point there. So best part of that, this is like the best part of the film right here. That's the opening. The opening I never had for the snow. But it does have a lot more fun things going on later on. Obviously, the next thing we dealt with was the return of the deputy who's now the sheriff.
Rick Cologne.
Which is funny because I actually didn't even recognize him at first. At the very first time I saw, I was like, "Wait, he looks kind of."
Yep.
Oh, it's him. Okay, all right,
Mhm.
cool, cool, cool.
Vincent Gostafaro is back as Rick Cologne, and again, it's very clear Womp Stomp made sure like they did their due diligence to get the people back. That they, if the character could be back in some capacity and they wanted it, they made sure to cast it accordingly. Like
Yeah,
I really respect that. And
yeah,
the thing is they've made it no real secret either on Twitter. If you follow Womp Stomp, which I highly recommend, number
yeah.
one, because
Great
it's
follow.
not just for this stuff, but they have such interesting talks and takes on so many of the franchises that are coming out and just talking about the current things in Hollywood. And they've said point blank that if they got the rights to it, they would love to remake these movies with a real budget and like really expand on a lot of the stuff that they were doing in these. Because you can see, to your point, they can only afford so many actors, they can only
Right.
afford so many things. And honestly, I know that I've said it before, but I also think that's part of what makes these work so well to me, and it makes it so much more special is it does feel a lot more linear than a lot of the Friday movies in that
Yeah.
capacity because you really streamline it down to just a handful of characters who some have had history with Jason, some have not. The whole Crystal Lake still trying to be hidden from people thing, them still trying to cover up all those murders, all of that kind of comes in a very interesting package in a way that, yes, all these movies have dealt with Crystal Lake doesn't want people to know what happened at Crystal Lake.
Right. Right.
But what happens when you finally get it off a map? What happens when you finally hide it's even out here? What happens when you get rid of the trails and you try to make sure people don't end up out there? Well, then you have some stupid hiker who decides that he's going to go off map to go find this thing. Like, there's so much interesting stuff at play that we don't normally see, and to have it so singularly on a character like Kyle or on a character like Mark, it now changes that dynamic where you're actually rooting for this guy
Yeah.
because you want them to live, you want them to survive. And it gives you really Tommy Jarvis vibes, which is why it's so good that Tom Matthews is also in this as the original final guy from these
Right.
movies.
Right. Right. I will say also props to Tom Matthews and Vincent Guastafaro. They didn't have to do this. They didn't have to
No,
do this. It's not like they have like sparkling. They're not A-list actors who It's not like I'm saying Scarlett Johansson came down and decided to do it, or Kevin Bacon didn't come back to do it. But
right.
still, they didn't have to do this at all for what reason. That was a long time ago for them. That's well, I mean, what Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason
40
was
years ago.
1986.
40 years ago,
Yeah,
basically.
so willing to go, yeah, you know what? I'll come help you out. You had a passion for the series, yeah, we'll do it. And they put their all in it. And yeah, so I'll give them major props. What a fun return for the fans, and it's a good return for the fans because actually the story makes sense that they're there. It makes sense that in a small town he becomes the sheriff. Absolutely, it makes sense that Tom Matthews is still pissed off at Jason. If you hear that Jason came back a couple of times, he said, "God, I thought I killed him before. What the hell? What do I have to do to kill this guy?" Um, Reprising that same role. It's good. It's a very
Well,
good.
and to have that kind of back and forth that they've clearly had since the sixth one, right? Like that relationship has never gotten better.
No,
And I actually respect that in a lot of ways. Like
yeah,
the everything that's happened to them in
right.
that time is so palpable that when you see them interact again for the first time in some capacity and seeing Tommy knowing that Jason's out there and the pain that it brings him and the frustration that he has that Rick continues to put his head in the sand about the situation. There's something very honest and real about that, I
Yeah,
think. And again, these movies have always been very good at just kind of changing over the cast over time, but there's something really special about actually revisiting these characters in particular with these actors in particular, continuing that story in
yeah,
particular in a way that we just don't normally get. It feels serialized in a very cool way. And to me, that is what helps make these movies stand out in that capacity because they're made with love and reverence in pushing this story forward.
right. I mean, these characters are traumatized, and like it's funny, like how it's a horror trope where like the police or the law enforcement or the authorities, or whatever, they don't listen to our main character or whoever. Oh, they piss and they moan, and at the end they figure out, oh, the guy was right in the first place. And it's almost like, well, why does that happen all the time? In this case, you almost like you understand why it's happening, because even though he's been through it before, this is like it was the worst time in his life. So A, he doesn't want to believe it's happening again, and B, even if Tommy was right, all Tommy does remind him of losing his sheriff. Remind him of that, probably one of the most horrible moments in his entire life. So he doesn't want anything to do with Tommy. Tommy's just a thing he'd like to drop off and never see again.
Yeah.
And he has to believe he saw Jason was killed. Like, Jason was killed this time. Okay, great. He's finally dead. I watched it happen this time, bud. So you're off your rocker. And it makes sense that way. I want to continue and say, again, they're such fans of the franchise that I almost feel like they dropped in a few little nuggets that kind of like are reminiscent. For example, we have a deputy, or a Gabang's deputy there, who reminded me a lot of Lachlan Monroe from Freddy vs. Jason. He's like the deputy who doesn't believe in like what's going on with his sheriff and everything else, kind of knows what's going on, wants like more to do, but he keeps getting like pushed around and pushed back. Of course, he has a very untimely end in this episode, in this installment. Our little
and what a kill!
Yeah,
what a kill! It's another one of
you don't get gun deaths very often in Friday the 13th,
especially not ones caused by Jason in some capacity, right? I mean, and again, that's another one of those. It's a little different because there's a little bit of a found footage vibe to it, because we do see some of it from the body cam.
That's what I was actually mentioning at one point. I loved the usage of the body cam. I thought that was brilliantly done, and it was terrifying.
Yes, it is. It's legitimately actually like the way that it builds, him walking in there, and especially because there's a great scene just a little bit before that where Jason has a hallucination of Mother. And what a great scene, by the way. This scene really, again, these people know Jason. Right. And the scene of Jason with Mother is really powerful in a very interesting way. Seeing Pamela and Jason actually sharing these moments in a way that we don't always see.
Right.
So that when the sheriff shows up, he's almost interrupting something.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it actually makes Jason's reaction that much more
visceral,
awful and terrifying and visceral. Yeah, because now suddenly Jason is not just angry that someone has stumbled upon him. He's mad that someone has interrupted it.
Yeah.
He was having time with Mom.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of funny when I watched through it. I thought this was almost my least favorite part of this installment. I wasn't sure how I felt about the Jason and Mom thing again. I felt like, in a way, it felt a little fan servicey to get something like that again. In a way, I didn't like Jason removing his mask in this one, especially because I don't think they had the real inner workings to make Jason. He seemed almost too normal in a way underneath. Although at the same time, maybe that was his projection of himself. I can kind of go that.
It's a projection.
And I can go that route, maybe myself, or maybe non-projection. So I wasn't exactly sure how I loved the scene itself, but I agree with you in what it meant for the cop interrupting, because that I did feel the same way. I did like that aspect of it. See itself, not my favorite part.
I love it because it feels like a weird fever dream, and I don't think we get a lot of that with that. Pamela is such a specific character.
Yeah.
And to me, like, you can only go to that well so many times.
Right.
But this one does it in the right way in some capacity for me, because it just feels also, again, done for people who maybe don't know where this also comes from. And I have to be mindful of that, right? Because that kind of scene is also done for an audience who may not know the Pamela of it all, because Pamela is talked about a ton in all of this.
Yeah.
Because they really kind of go back to the fateful night. Right. This movie really leans on the fateful night of Pamela doing what she does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I will say, well, going back to what you said again, going back to the very beginning of the film, I don't know if this was that part of Disappear, or if it was done like that little pre-interstitial stuff. I don't know if it was added later on. I loved like the TV report in the beginning.
Yes. That's one of the new things.
That's what I thought. I really felt that was okay. And what a great way to do that. It was grainy footage. It was news footage. It seemed like real, genuine like footage that was on the news. And I don't know what they took it from. But those reports really set the tone of the entire thing. It felt so gritty, so creepy. It was a great way to contextualize it.
You know what it reminded me of a little bit was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003. Because remember they opened their movie with the footage of people going into the house,
right?
And it's all like it kind of gave me that feel of like the real life reporters going in and stuff like that. I just thought that was so fascinating because it sets the whole tone for the thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It really sets the whole tone for it. I loved that. I think part of my issue also though was with that fever dream sequence is that mom looked too young for me. Like you have Betsy Palmer in the first one.
I can understand that. Yeah.
It just took me out a little bit. You could say, Jason knew her and she was younger a little bit, but not that much younger. So it took me out a little bit to have Betsy Palmer, the old grandmother-y type, but also have this like, I don't know, like CW type looking actress. And like,
I see it as that is the version of his mother that he remembers because clearly he sees himself projected differently too.
Yeah.
And so I think what he's projecting is basically how young she was. Right. This is my take on it. When he was young, before he died, this is what she would have looked like to him. So when he sees her, that's what he sees.
And that works. That absolutely works. So, I mean, I can't say it doesn't work. I did love the blue sweater though. That was a nice little add touch.
Yeah, what a nice touch, right?
That's there. So I did appreciate that aspect of it. So yes, the cop again. We talked about the cop and the cop's body cam and everything else. The whole cop sequence, the whole deputy thing he went through was very cool. I love the moment where he's like spreading the. He has a moment with his girlfriend or his wife, maybe on the phone. He's spreading salt on things. He sees them sees Tommy carving Jason into the car. I feel like he was a character we wanted to like, and we felt bad for. But at the same time, we knew he was toast. You know what I mean?
It's so good. I love stuff like that, right? Because sometimes it's okay to just know someone's gonna die.
Ultimate fodder. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But they did enough to do it so you make you feel bad. I think the phone call with the wife or fiance, whoever, I can't remember, his significant other, it made him more real, and it made him more like, oh man, this guy's gonna go. We never had that. We don't know if he's alone or not, and whatever. But now he's not coming home to somebody who's expecting him to come home, and that was tough.
It's tough, but it's one of those. Again, I love it because it really humanizes these characters in a way that I just don't think these movies always do. And again, it's not necessarily a dig at the movies. It's just that they're setting out to do something very different in Never Hike Alone and Never Hike Alone 2, basically, than a lot of these movies would, which is serialized storytelling with characters that continue to come back.
Right.
Not just Jason, but like actual character work. And you need to know and care about these people and these characters. And I really appreciate that they really lean on it. Yeah. And so by even having that phone call, which any other movie probably could have cut out, right? The cop could have just gone in and just been killed. But by humanizing him and giving him that moment, you're actively like, don't go in the door. Now suddenly I'm yelling, don't you do that. This is going to end badly for you. Go far away from this man. Like,
go home to your woman.
Yeah. It's one of those, I love that because I actually now am yelling at the screen, which is a thing that I don't necessarily do.
Right. No, you don't care. Like I said before, a lot of times you were arguing against this character. Like he's the kind of character like, he's being an asshole. He deserves to get his head chopped off by Jason. This deputy did nothing wrong. The deputy actually did everything right, and he did the right thing and reached out to the woman. He's like, I'm gonna be late tonight. There's a homicide. I have to stick around. He's doing the right thing. He's doing what he's supposed to do, and he still is going to pay for it. It makes it so much more tragic. And it's a showcase to all like the filmmakers. If you're going to go back to the Friday the 13th saga, any slasher saga, it doesn't take a lot to humanize a character. Well, what was that film conversation? What, like a minute and a half of film? And it made the difference between caring about somebody's death and like really caring about somebody's death. And the effect.
It's a little moment and it works. And in the same way that honestly, all the scenes involving Diana Hill, the mother of Mark, and everything going on with Rick when he goes to tell her that her son is missing, and obviously they haven't found the body yet. Again, what great moments that any other Friday film probably could have cut out in some capacity, because usually you're just trying to get to the next kill, but these ones are building those moments to now we're looking back at one kill and how tragic it was. We're looking back at this character who just didn't deserve that. This mother who is only going to know that pain. This character that is eventually going to stumble upon this, right? And we know that. Like, there's something really, really smart and really, really interesting about that being done in these, because you don't necessarily get that kind of character work normally.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't help but wondering how intentional it was for the reasons, or was it like a happy accident? And I say that because we obviously, again, we have a really super low budget, even for a horror film. We have less actors, so we don't have that a lot of next deaths to get to. So how much of this was built on a need to fill out some moments and do it with humanity instead? And have it, and I don't mean happy accidents. Like, I'm sure they knew what they're doing as far as the scene itself. What they wrote the scene, they know what they're trying to do and trying to get you involved. But was it like the necessary, because they didn't have as much death to get to? If they could have gotten to 5 or 6 more deaths, would they have continued to do this, or would they have gone to the old horror school trope of not humanizing the characters? I think there's probably, if I'm completely honest, there's probably a middle ground to it somewhere in there. But like, again, what they did with the budget they had, they made the most out of it and the best they could, and they pivoted when they need to pivot, adding layers that weren't necessarily there originally. And it's a good thing for the film. It's a good thing. So
it's a very good thing. And again, even if it was meant to be like a happy accident of we need to pad the time out, it works. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because here's the thing, the Ghost Cut is a very brisk 82 minutes. So it's like a straight up real runtime of a movie and everything. And yet it doesn't feel it. It's actually, this thing is very well paced, especially for being an anthology that is putting things together. It could feel weirdly paced, but because the two Never Hike Alones, as far as these are concerned, were paced very specifically for what they are, the movie itself as a whole feels very well paced, because you can really feel it builds crescendos and then builds to crescendo again, getting to the cliffhanger. And I love that. It just feels not like a rocket, but a very just well thought out, well paced thing. And, when they recut all this, they could have also cut some of that out if they had wanted to trim the runtime down in some capacity. You could have cut little things here and there. There's no, you know what I'm saying? You could have George Lucas special editioned it, basically.
Absolutely.
And they didn't. And I really appreciate that they let those scenes play out the way they do, because it really just strengthens what they're trying to do with this, which is really give Friday a very proper film with real proper character work.
Right. And I will agree with you 75 to 80% of the way. And I think the Never Hike in the Snow is extremely well paced. Overall, the film, The Ghost Cut, is well paced. There are some moments in Never Hike Alone, like the third final aspect, which might have been able to be trimmed a little bit because again of the concept, which we're going to get to. I don't even get to the concept now. Obviously, we had a concept here, which is not something we deal with Jason at all. And again, was it born out of necessity, or was it born out of the idea they wanted to do it? But we have
or was it a little of both?
Or a little bit of both. Maybe a little, absolutely could have been a little bit of both. I am not privy to the filmmaker's knowledge on it. I've not read any interviews or talking about it. We have a conceptual basis. We're going to have a 1 versus 1. Jason's not killing a bunch of teenagers. Jason's not doing on some mass rampage. This is one singular hiker hiking alone, unfortunately, as the title says, and he deals with Jason. And the whole film is that. There are no other real characters in this until the very end, of course, which we talk about. But for the most of the film, it's this special blogger or video vlogger hiker that takes you on these very long journeys, and he's a very good expert type of hiker. But all the footage is basically his video footage of what he sees and of what he's going to put forth into the world. And we don't get that with Jason very much, where it's one-on-one the whole time. I mean, you can kind of say Jason versus Carrie was trying to do that a little bit, but even then had a lot of teenagers around him, and one had superpowers. This is a normal, definitely athletic individual versus Jason on his own. And what a great concept that starts with. Now, before I let you interview with your thoughts on that, I will say it does lead to some problematic is too strong of a word, but some challenging things that I don't think they completely overcome as a result of that beast, but we'll get there. But overall, it's definitely a successful entry, and what a great start to a little franchise, little mini franchise they have.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I think that it must be said that Andrew Leidy, who plays Kyle MacLeod, this doesn't work if he's not very charming and very good for what he is doing. And he is very good and very charming. And you actually care about this dude. He's this online blogger, video blogger type who does a lot of the trail stuff. And he seems like the kind of dude that you would watch on YouTube for information that you would trust to be this, hiker type. And I love him calling out one of the commenters where he's like, this is for, not for new hikers. So Hiker Man 5000 or whatever, like, sorry, bud, this one's not for you. I love stuff like that because as two guys who do a podcast, we have a lot of people who come and comment on our stuff, and we have a lot of the same people. So I can always kind of know how certain people interact with us and how they take some of our takes. And that's always so interesting. So that for us is even like our own characters.
Yeah.
In that. And I like that. I feel seen, as it were.
It's funny you say that. I actually wrote in one of my notes was, I do like Kyle. That was my notes.
Yeah.
I do like Kyle.
Kyle's a really good character, and he feels like the natural evolution of characters that we have seen in this franchise. Again, it's a modernization without going full tilt weird with it, right? And they find a really good way to do this, that this guy is going to do his hiking video, and this is how it's going to play out. It's built in. It works. Now, is there a lot of him running through the woods, and do they do a lot of that to really set the tone of the Crystal Lake and the dread that we're going to feel? Yeah, probably. Maybe a little too much at times. But it doesn't really bother me because at the same time, it really captures the spirit of a lot of those videos that you're going to watch.
Right.
So, the back and forth is, does it work in the movie? Perhaps, perhaps not, depending on your mileage. But in what you're trying to accomplish, it absolutely nails that tone of what a lot of those videos on the internet seem to really push. I've watched a lot of those like travel videos and hiking videos and stuff, and that really comes through. So they really capture the spirit the right way. Whether it also helps the pacing can be seen as another thing entirely, right? Because there is a lot of him running through the forest and seeing different action cuts of him doing things. And it's like, I can see it being a little tiring after a bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's part of it. I do say this is more drawn out. And like I said, at one point, it takes a long time before we find Jason. We do have that one moment which I texted you about earlier. I didn't love. He gets to this bridge. He has to decide whether he's going to go trespass on the land or it's going to take a long time to go around it. And all of a sudden, you see Jason in the background out of nowhere, like in his footage, and it's just it didn't feel like Jason to me because it's like, okay, I know we need to see. It's almost like this is like we need to see Jason. Almost like a studio note. We need to see Jason a long time before we do, like at least earlier on the show. So we're going to show you Jason really quick. And then we don't again. And that doesn't seem like Jason to me, how like he let him live. Like if Jason sees somebody on his territory, you're just going to die right then. There's not a lot of playing around that Jason usually does. You talked about evolution of it, and that's fine, I guess. It did take me out just a smidge. It felt like this is where the concept kind of hurted a little bit, and I had to do this. But it is, again, it's kind of a nitpick. I fully admit it's a nitpick for it. But we do take a long time before we get to the actual Jason versus Kyle action. And again, that might be necessary because Jason tends to be, if he's not even super powered, he's still good at what he does. He's done a lot of it. So Kyle's not exactly anything. He's a hunter. He's not a hunter. He's a hiker, not a fighter or anything else like that. So, So yeah, I see what you're saying, and I definitely see it's definitely drawn out at times.
For
Overall, has great moments in it.
And I think also that Kyle being this like hiker survivalist type actually makes it really interesting once we finally get to the one-on-one of the Jason of it all. Because Kyle really does put up a fight against Jason in a way that we don't always also get to see. Like, again, this is a pretty full movie that allows this dude to be the only guy going after Jason or Jason going after him. And we get like straight up actual him brawling with him, basically.
Yeah.
And it is fun as hell.
And it's believable too, though. It's not one of those things that it's all like, okay, I see what he's doing. He gets hurt, he gets moments, he has to struggle through. I mean, hell, one of my quotes is a lot about him treating his injuries in this one. But it doesn't make sense. It makes sense because he's on his own, miles away from civilization, I guess, at this point. This is a Crystal Lake camp that is legitimately shut down. And the way he's set up is that it's going to take a long time to get somewhere. So he's got to treat his injuries, or he's going to go. He's going to go. Couple of really cool things before we get to the brawl, I will say. I love two things. First of all, he has that like product placement with the machete or the shovel rather. And I love how that comes back into play kind of towards the end, which I think that's a great.
It's a Chekhov's rule, you know.
Right, exactly. But then the other part I really like was it's a small detail that when you say it out loud, it might not mean much, but I love the fact that we watch the camera and the battery goes down.
Yeah, I love that throughout.
Like, and he never comments on it
every time.
It never became like this thing, like, oh man, and it didn't make it could have been overdone, like, oh god, he's gonna run out of battery, we're not gonna see what it's never mentioned, everything else, but it is like it does add to that sense of dread, like time is ticking out, time is ticking away. And you're about to die, kind of thing. I love that small aspect of it.
It's such a small thing, but I notice it every time, and it makes me happy every time I revisit it because it becomes a ticking clock, right? In a lot of ways. And I kind of love that because we don't get that sort of a propulsive motion knowingly in a movie like that. And just waiting to be like, what's going to happen if it goes down? Like whether you realize it or not, you are paying attention to it. And you're like, what's going to happen if he like, is it going to run out? And he, to your point, he never points out at it, which I love. I think it's great that he never points it out. But when you're paying attention to it because you keep noticing it, it immediately becomes like, I'm getting tense because what is that? What happens after that goes away? Are we going to know if he survives or not? Who knows?
We don't know. But
it's great tension building.
Yeah. It's subtle, but it's great, especially when he gets injured, especially when he gets to the point where we don't know if he's going to get out of it. I love he finds go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and to note the subtleties of it all, the little subtle lore building on what happened at Crystal Lake while he's walking through the cabins.
Yeah, that's
and you've seen. Oh yeah, is that it? Perfect. Because I love the little bits of him finding all the different marks of here's where the murder happened. Here's the different things, and we start to see, and we kind of get giddy, and it's like he. I know what happened right there. You know, like they just done in such a cool way that's fan servicey without feeling in your face about it. It feels very real of someone who has no idea or has some idea. He always thought it was a ghost story, but to stumble upon it and see that it was actually real is very cool and different.
It's a slow realization too. That's the thing. We get our own version of the campfire story. He starts the fire inside the abandoned buildings, and he sits down and tells his viewers the ghost story that he's there. It's a great way to incorporate. His brother used to tell him, right? And incorporates everything great because he is telling his audience, and we are at this point his audience. So it actually works in story as well as being part of the lore. And I love it too. He kind of finds all these pink ribbons. These ribbons were like a marking crime scene tape, so like that basically, or evidence tape as it would be. And it's a brilliant way to kind of do it and get involved. And like the camera going down, it adds to that dread because the camera starts going down at that point. We start seeing the proof of what's going on, and we're at this point we're waiting for Jason to arrive. He has no idea he's coming, but Jason's there, and he's about to be up in his face.
And it's so good because again, the build to the Jason in this throughout all three. Obviously, we get the video up front that reintroduces the character.
Mm-hmm.
In Snow, we're hit with him up front. Then he disappears, becomes a ghost until he pops up again, kills the sheriff. But in this, the build to him again in the third act, basically, which is this movie, is really well done.
Yeah.
Because we already know he's out there.
Yeah.
We already know he's killed one hiker. He finds the body. We know that Jason's here.
Right.
That reveal is so good.
Yes.
It is so good. When he's behind the towel
Mm-hmm.
or the sheet and he grabs him and our guy Kyle gets wrapped up in it and you start seeing everything from the point of view of the camera, it is so terrifying. Because we've seen the door, Chekhov's door, if you will, as well.
Yep.
But we know that it's out there, right? We know that he knows there's the door, the way that he falls, the way that all of it's kind of happening, and we're seeing it just from the point of view of the camera. It's really almost nauseating to watch in the right way because it feels so real. You feel stuck in that moment, and I love it. It works so well, and it just really captures the fear that you should feel when Jason arrives.
Right. And again, that's why that's why I go back to the part that didn't work for me. Like when you showed him earlier, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see him earlier.
Sure.
I wanted that to be the first thing. Like, oh my God, holy shit, that's what it is. That's the first time I see it. And it doesn't kill it. It doesn't kill it. It's still a very strong reveal. And that's the good thing. We have this great brawl sequence. We get these things where Kyle gets injured, is able to get away though. At times, for the most part, still treating his injuries, still doing those fights. I love the machete versus the shovel moment.
Yeah.
That bring the shovel back. It kind of looks like, oh well, not that bad, I guess.
Yeah. It's really well done. And I gotta say too, one of the things I really enjoy in this, at least for me, and something I take away every time, the entire sequence when he's going around the camp and the tension is building.
Mm-hmm.
The way it's shot and the way that it's put together and the way it really focuses on Kyle and it cuts between his camera and us with the light and the knife and then like the cuts behind him and just kind of seeing as he's traversing it, it really builds. It's a really great tension building sequence. And it's a good 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And they use their time wisely at the end. For sure. They have moments where he gets away from Jason for a little bit. He does the video blog where like, if you find this is who I am. This is all going on. All my gear's left the camp. I got to go back to the camp to get to my supplies, or else I'm not going to last the night because I have this like possibly infected leg wound now. It was actually great to see because, quite frankly, you don't usually have a good reason to go back. Like you get away from Jason, and that's it. You get away from Jason, you won the game. You get out of there, and people go back for stupid reasons. This actually is a genuine reason. He will die unless he gets those medical supplies. They put it out there. They put it out there straight like that, and that's what makes it like okay. He's got to go back knowing that Jason's there and try to make it work. But it brawl out, and it makes it even more tense and more insane.
And I think to your point, this is why it's so good.
Yeah.
Because it really does set up that I don't want to go back there.
Right.
But if I don't go back there, I'm dead either way.
Yeah.
Like my leg is going to get infected and then what? So I have to go back. I don't want to, but I either die or I die.
Right.
And there's not a lot of in between, but like one of these allows me to possibly survive.
Right.
Like I could just give up and die, or I could attempt to live.
Right.
And that is so great.
Smart.
As a character. Yes, exactly. It's such a great character building thing. And I have to say, Vicente DeSanti, who directed this, also plays Jason in this portion of the Never Hike Alone.
Gotcha.
And it is a great Jason performance.
Oh, it is. And
like
he's got
talked a lot
to step into, yeah.
Quite literally. Like, and they make it known too. The way that the sound design is done for when Jason is walking towards them in this is horrifying in the
Yes.
best way. It's loud. It's monstrous. Like
Mm.
you feel every step because it's just thud,
Yeah.
thud, thud. It
Does.
really gets that like deep fear of
Guttural
Jason.
fear. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, Kyle is played so well by Andrew. Tommy is played once again so well by Tom Matthews. But it really comes down to the Jason performances. And I think DeSanti in this first one is so good. And then Douglas Tate in Never Hike Alone in the Snow is so good. They both get these characteristics of the character in such interesting ways, in the movements, in the way that he's looking, the way that he's hunting. Like they really land the feel of Jason in a way that just really works. And
Agreed.
again, these are big shoes to fill. There's been a lot of people who've played these characters. It can be really easy to get lost in what that means. They get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they know that it's easy to fall into dumb horror tropes. And there are
Yeah.
good horror tropes and there are dumb horror tropes. And these skip over the dumb horror tropes and kind of lean into the good horror tropes and provide a good sense of engagement. It doesn't treat the fan, the viewer, as if they're stupid. It's going to bring them along with the journey. It's not going to insult their intelligence, and it does very well with it. It does very well with it. So
It totally does. And I think that when we look at the big brawl sequence, it really brings that point forward, right?
Mhm.
Because the big brawl feels exciting, it feels fun, it feels fresh, but it feels new, but it
Right.
feels classic. It
Right.
feels like a real mano y mano, like, dude, Jason thinks he can take this dude, but he's never really faced a like full-on survivalist.
Right.
This
Right.
guy who is like his job and his being is to be out here surviving in the wild and surviving in nature. And there's this great moment earlier in the movie where he's in the tent and he hears all the coyotes and he goes, "Oh, that's a pack of coyotes. There's like 6 or 8 of them. And they sound like they're after something. They're hunting something or something's hunting them." And then
Right.
you hear one of them yelp out and scream and he gets this look on his face like,
Oh.
that's not right. Like
Right.
something's wrong. And it
Right.
starts to get quiet and it sets the stage for there's this bigger thing. And he knows it's out there. And so when you finally get to the Jason of it all and they really throw down, you really feel it because
Right.
they built to that moment already, like they've really gotten us there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other tricks of the trade that they do that I actually really appreciated. A lot of great Kyle POV shots.
Yeah.
And this is one of those horror tropes that again is typical, but I love when it happens because it's a good solid jump scare when Kyle is hiding behind, I forget, a piece of wall or something, and then all of a sudden, like he sees Jason, he goes away, he comes back, and Jason's gone, and all of a sudden, Jason's face just right into the camera, the jump scare. It's so well done, used
And
all
the
the
machete
time.
comes through the door.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. It's so well done, but like, is it overdone? I mean, I can't say it's overdone because it works every time for me still. But it's a well done version of that trope, and I did enjoy that quite a bit.
I like a lot of the POV stuff, either in that capacity or the ones on the camera.
Yeah.
Again, because one of the things we know after the 2009 film was there was a lot of talk that one of the movies was potentially going to be a found footage movie. They talked about doing a found footage Friday the 13th film, and I think that a full found footage movie might not necessarily work.
Right.
At least in my opinion. I don't know if you can really do a Friday the 13th film fully found footage unless you do it in a perspective of like they're all cops basically.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so everyone's got body
Body
cam or
cams.
something of
Yeah.
that. Because you have to really, your story has to really allow it.
Right.
And that's what I like here is that the way they did it, we do get the found footage of the cop from the body cam. You get a
Yes,
little
that
bit
works.
of the hiking stuff. It works when it's built into the story and it's not the main driving force, and we get pieces of it put into the bigger movie narrative.
Right. Absolutely. All right, let's talk about the last sequence or whatever you want to say. We'll wrap this
The end of the
thing
film.
up. The end of the film, the last sequence there. I will say I love it, but there is some confusion at times because there's a lot of that whole like fake out.
Is it a
This
dream? Is it
real? Is
not?
it a dream? And it's almost like they'd almost never quite settle on what's real and what's not at the time. And we end up with
I think
Kyle.
that they do,
They
because
do,
I think he's getting into shock is the biggest thing, and we're actually, in a way we don't see in the other movies of the survivors actually dealing with the trauma as it's happening.
right,
This one is actively allowing us for like 10 minutes to see him going in, because again, like he's cleaned the wounds, but he's still going into shock.
right.
And so that plays a part in the delusions of it all. And I kind of dig that.
I don't not dig it. I want to put that out there.
Yeah.
I don't think I not dig it. Because it starts off when he's at the bank of the lake by the moonlight, and all of a sudden you get Jason in his face, and then you see the moon in Jason's eye, which is a great shot, by the way. Seeing the moon in
Yeah, it
Jason's
is.
eye was a brilliant shot. Then all of a sudden, like, he's gone. So okay, so did that happen? Did Jason actually show that? Was that his vision? I don't know. Then all of a sudden he wakes up and he's alive. There's no Jason, and then then all of a sudden he comes, he sees the lake, and then all of a sudden Jason jumps out of the lake, and it's like, wait, just is that real? Is that, I don't know. Then he squashes his head.
Okay, but by the way, what an
Great
effect!
effect.
Again, top kill in this franchise. Whether it actually happens or not is another thing entirely.
Right.
It is some insane practical effects work.
Absolutely. Now you're gonna say it doesn't have the fever dream because he wakes up in the ambulance, which, okay, that's fine. But it's just weird. Like, again, I think it wasn't. If I love the moon shot, like I said, but it's kind of weird. Like, it's in the dark, you see him, then he's not there. Then he is there, and he's not there, and it's just a weird sense. Once you get into the ambulance, I'm a little better with it, because then I see it's obvious that it's not happening. Like, Jason's not in the ambulance with him.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot more sense to me, and that works. But then I have those great flashes with the red, kind of like the Love Lies Bleeding thing I just saw with that Harris.
Yeah.
That was like that kind of like red. I loved that aspect of that terrifying red, shadowy kind of thing.
I just love that build because, again, I kind of like that instead of spending, 3 minutes on a did it happen, did it not, like some of the other ones, this one lets you live in that fear of,
I don't know if it's true or not.
yeah, but he also knows, like, oh, this happened to me, but is he still here? Is he not here? Like, that is so great. And the way it intercuts with the real world of the people in the ambulance being like, are you all right? Like, what happened to you? And him starting to mutter about Jason, and just like this back and forth, and then the flashes of Jason standing in front of him in the back of the ambulance, and then he's not there. Is he there? Is he not there?
Right.
To the reveal that Tommy Jarvis is driving the ambulance.
Now, this did throw me a little bit. Maybe you can help me out here, because it feels like it almost feels like this should have been the introduction to Tommy, and then at the end, when Tommy leaves, like, Tommy will go into his never hike in the snow type character because he knows Jason's back. You know what I mean? So, like,
well, and we have to remember the reason it feels like that is also because this was technically the first movie, and it's the first time you see him if you watch it in real time.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why retroactively it doesn't work as well. It's almost like they had Tommy for the end, and then when they made the second one, like, well, we could have Tommy and have him do the thing. But it does kind of hurt that entrance that way. I almost feel like this should have been the beginning part or something like that. But again,
it's still a really good sequel tease, though, too.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful sequel tease. We get Tommy getting to be upset, and Tommy getting to, you son of a bitch, I knew you're here, kind of thing.
Yeah. Because he's been hunting him for so long and knowing, but for him to see him again, it just kind of changes things, because now the realization is it's real.
Remember me, asshole. Love it.
Yeah. Oh, what a good line.
And what a great ending, too. He drives away with the kid, Kyle, in the back of the ambulance, and he drives away. And then the last shot of Jason, like, walking the trail after the ambulance.
Yeah.
I love that, like, you imply that he's going to walk to the ambulance. No matter where it goes, he's like walking it down. No matter how long it's going to take, he'll get there and he'll destroy you. It's great way to end the film.
It is. And also, one of the things I really appreciate about it, and of course, we'll get to talk about it a little bit more with Never Hike Alone 2, the sequence involving the ambulance techs, Axel and Denny, is so creepy and scary because we don't see everything.
Right. That's a tried and true horror trope that works more often than you would think. Like you
Yeah.
don't. We always talk about great effects, great kills. We even did it today. That great axe kill was wonderful. The shotgun, the head blown up, wonderful stuff. But sometimes it's even scarier not to see something. It works. Your imagination, nothing can beat what happens in your imagination. It's always been the case.
But they do end up. We do get to see it later, which is very fun.
Right. At this point, though, we don't really.
We don't, and I love it though because it works. It's so good and it's so fun. And again, one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit with Never Hike Alone too, which is really interesting, is how much of it is kind of intercut to the things that are happening during Never Hike Alone, and Never Hike in the Snow, because there is a little bit of, to your point, the Tommy Jarvis of it all is much more expanded on, because Tommy is basically the main character in Never Hike Alone 2 comparatively here, where he is kind of set up to be a bigger character later.
Correct.
And I really appreciate that, because it feels like a good tease. What it was a good tease at the end of Never Hike Alone, it was a better tease having it expanded in Never Hike in the Snow, and then you get to Never Hike Alone 2 and it's like, oh, it is on, and Tommy is like that guy.
Right.
And I really love that.
100%. 100%. So, all right. I think we should rank them and stuff, do our rankings and everything else. We are going to rank this alongside the Friday the 13th films that we've done so far. Whether that's fair or not, that's your miles may vary, considering the budgetary things and everything else, but we're going to do it. And we're also going to rank our Jasons. So, let's start the Jasons first. Our Jason performances in this film overall, in comparison to the rest of the saga. I'll list it now in order from top to bottom, or I'll go from bottom to top. From bottom to top for myself, Part 1, Part 2, Jason Goes to Hell, Part 4, Part 3, Part 8, Freddy vs. Jason, Part 6, 2009, Jason X, Part 7, New Blood. PJ, in your order, was Part 1 as well, Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy vs. Jason, which is the biggest discrepancy on our list, Part 2, Part 3, Part 6, Part 8, Part 4, Part 7, Jason X, and your favorite was Derek Mears in 2009.
Yes.
Where do you put this version of Jason in your rankings?
I'm going to put him right around 7.
Right around 7. Wow, that's up there. Okay, so it's either above 7, under 10, or below 7 and above Part 4.
I'm going to go ahead and say above Part 4.
Above Part 4. Okay, so you're going to put Never Hike Alone at right underneath Part 7, right above Part 4. Okay. For me, it's tough. I'm going to put it a little bit lower, but not. It's still a Jason performance I really enjoy. I'm going to put it right below Part 8 and right above Part 3, which is right smack in the middle of the pack for me.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I think it's very good.
Again, this is the wilderness era, and this thing is so good that Jason, no matter how we look at it, is mid or top tier.
Right. That's impressive. Let's talk about the film.
That's how good this character is.
Let's talk about the film, and let's get to it there. We'll go from order here. Friday the 13th, Part 1, I gave it a 6 out of 11 because we always turn things up to 11 here on PLD Projects. You gave it a 6.5. Part 2, I gave an 8. You gave it an 8.5. Part 3, I gave a 7. You gave a 7. Part 4, I gave a 9.5. You gave it a 10. Part 5, I gave a 5.5. You gave it a 6. Part 6, I gave a perfect 11. You gave it a perfect 11. Part 7, I gave it a perfect 11. You gave it a 9.5. Part 8, I gave a 3, and you gave it a 4. Jason Goes to Hell, I gave it a 4.5. You gave it a 3. Jason X, I gave it a 10. You gave it a perfect 11. Freddy vs. Jason, I gave it 10. You gave it an 8. And 2009, I gave it a 7.5. And PJ, you gave it a 10. So on a scale of 1 to 11, after hearing those scores, where do you put Never Hike Alone, the Ghost Cut?
Never Hike Alone is at 10.5. This is the follow-up to Friday Part 6 that I have always wanted.
Wow.
And so that should tell you everything you need to know about how I'm going to feel about the next one. But
10.5.
love this movie. Legitimately. And I'm not saying this just because it genuinely is one that I just enjoy revisiting all the time. I have so much fun with it. I think that, again, even for its, you know, flaws in being a smaller production, I think it really edges out in character. I think it really edges out in what it sets out to do. This is a movie that I continue to revisit more frequently than a lot of other slasher films that are made by bigger studios. Like that, this really just gets the character in the world to me in a way that I don't necessarily think we had seen in a very long time.
I wow, I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I love it though. I love that for you. It's not quite that for me. I'm going to give it a very solid. I still think a very solid 7.5. Very solid
Okay,
7.5.
we're all allowed to be wrong sometimes.
I think I like. I'm remembering Never Hike Alone too, and I think I'm liking that more for the reasons I mentioned before. I think this has spots of brilliance. So I'm still putting it above Friday the 13th. I'm putting it above Friday the 13th Part 3. I'm definitely putting it above 8 and Final Friday. I'm putting it right on par with 2009, which we both actually really enjoyed.
Yeah, I put it
So
on par with 2009 for myself, basically too. So
So, I mean, yeah, I think it's a solid effort. So, I liked it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. 7.5 out of 11 is nothing to shake your leg at. So, yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode, folks. We got next episode. We will take the sequel from Womp Stomp Studios, and that will be our second of 3 Womp Stomp Studio films we're going to be covering, Womp Stomp films, because we are going to add Dylan's New Nightmare to the Nightmare on Elm Street saga as well, because
yeah.
we really enjoyed that one. We watched that one together in Arizona as well. So I really, really appreciated that one. So I guess that should do it for this week. PJ, where can the folks find you?
You guys can find me on all the social media platforms at PJ Campbell. You can also find me here talking about movies and doing all the fun things with my boy, just hanging out, having a good time. Thank you guys so much as always for the support. It means the world to us.
Absolutely. Speaking of support, hit that like, hit that subscribe. It's your first time here. We got about 555 now. We're marching slowly towards 1,000. We'd love to get there sooner than later. I'll take 600 first, though. Baby steps, baby steps. If you want to help even further, patreon.com/PLD Projects. Such stalwart companions as Austin Cadell, Brandon Buckingham, Jeff Alterman. Can't do it without you guys at all. You help keep the lights on for sure. Yeah, you can find me all over this place. Like I said, Two Mediocre White Dudes. You got Big Blue Box, which I also do with PJ. That's a more, every once in a while podcast we do. We will be back full on when the new series starts in May. You can find me doing a review with Lego where we talk about 1980s sci-fi franchise Fee. Crown Jewels, where I talk about Queen. Pretty much, I do the entire catalog of Queen. We're working on that kind of journey. And Holy Snokes, a Star Wars podcast every Wednesday. So covering the Bad Batch as it roars toward its finale, and we get towards Acolyte, which is going to come soon. But until then, until next week, next time, 2 weeks from now, I hope you guys stay mediocre. Never underestimate the power of mediocrity. Bye.
Later.